Let's take a look at it. It's video 1. It's just a sidewalk.
They made America laugh every week on All in the Family. But when the cameras stopped rolling, something dark was hiding. Carroll O'Connor and Rob Reiner barely spoke to each other off-screen. Their fights got so intense, the whole show almost fell apart. What could have been the reason two professionals hate each other this much? Could anything have fixed what broke between them? Join us as we reveal the bitter feud that stayed secret for decades. The perfect illusion. For years, everyone thought they had it all figured out. Carroll O'Connor and Rob Reiner seemed like the perfect television duo. They played Archie Bunker and his son-in-law, Mike Stevick, on All in the Family, and their on-screen chemistry was electric. Week after week, millions of Americans tuned in to watch them argue, clash, and somehow still feel like family. The show became a cultural phenomenon, and people assumed that behind the scenes, these two actors must have shared a special bond. After all, how could you create that kind of magic without genuinely liking each other? The truth was almost the exact opposite. Behind the laughter and the studio audience applause, something much darker was brewing. O'Connor and Reiner weren't just colleagues who disagreed occasionally. They could barely stand to be in the same room together. The tension between them wasn't the creative kind that pushes artists to do better work. It was personal, bitter, and it ran deep. What the audience saw as brilliant acting was often genuine hostility, barely contained by professional obligation. The situation got so bad that production actually had to stop multiple times. These weren't minor disagreements that could be smoothed over during a coffee break. The attacks between them became so intense that Norman Lear, the show's creator, was forced to step in and play referee. Imagine being so successful that your show is the #1 program in America, yet the two leads despise each other so much that you have to pause filming to keep them from tearing each other apart. Here's what makes this story fascinating. This feud reveals a rarely discussed truth about television history. Sometimes the most authentic performances don't come from chemistry or friendship. They come from genuine conflict. The audience felt the tension was real because it actually was real. Every barb, every heated exchange, every moment of frustration you saw on screen had roots in something true happening off camera. The show worked because the conflict was authentic, not manufactured. This proves something important about great art. It doesn't always require harmony behind the scenes. In fact, some of the most memorable television moments in history were created by people who genuinely hated each other. O'Connor and Reiner walked onto that set every single day knowing they despised one another, yet they still delivered performances that changed television forever. The hatred was hiding in plain sight, disguised as brilliant acting, and nobody in the audience had any idea just how real it all was. The first line crossed the conflict between Carroll O'Connor and Rob Reiner didn't develop slowly over time. It started almost immediately, and it came down to two completely different views of what they were doing on that set. O'Connor came from the old school of acting. He had spent decades working in theater, film, and television. To him, acting was about interpretation and craft. You took the material, you found the humanity in your character, and you let the audience make up their own minds about what it all meant. He believed every gesture mattered, and every line carried weight. Reiner walked into All in the Family from an entirely different place. He was younger, politically passionate, and deeply shaped by everything happening in America during the late 60s. The protests, the social movements, the generational battles over Vietnam and civil rights had formed his worldview. He didn't see the show as just entertainment. To Reiner, it was a cultural weapon, a chance to change minds and challenge the prejudices that were tearing the country apart. His character, Mike Stevick, wasn't just Archie's son-in-law. He was written as Archie's complete ideological opposite, and Reiner took that mission seriously. The real problems started during rehearsals. O'Connor noticed something that immediately set off alarm bells in his mind. Reiner didn't wait for the director to give notes or suggestions. He would jump in and interrupt table reads. He challenged how lines should be delivered. He argued about the moral framing of entire scenes. To O'Connor, this wasn't collaboration between fellow actors. It felt like confrontation, like someone was trying to take control of something that wasn't theirs to control. What really got under O'Connor's skin was how Reiner kept insisting that Archie needed to be clearly wrong in every situation. He wanted the audience to see Archie exposed, corrected, and morally defeated. O'Connor completely disagreed with this approach. He believed Archie's real power as a character came from being recognizable and human, not from being humiliated or turned into a simple villain that everyone could dismiss. More than once, O'Connor just stopped mid-rehearsal. He would stare at Reiner, refuse to continue, and wait until everyone calmed down. The message was crystal clear without him having to say a word. You don't run this set. From that moment forward, something hardened between them that never softened. O'Connor felt that Reiner wasn't acting like a fellow performer. He was acting like a judge, like someone who thought he had the moral authority to police everyone else's work and decisions. 7 years of controlled warfare. What started as rehearsal disagreements evolved into something far more calculated and hostile. As All in the Family exploded into the most watched sitcom in America, Norman Lear began to realize something disturbing. The tension between O'Connor and Reiner wasn't fading with success. It was actually getting worse. The ideological clash that made the show work on screen didn't stay in the script. It followed both actors everywhere, infecting rehearsals, blocking sessions, and even the moments right before cameras started rolling. Jean Stapleton, who played Edith Bunker, started noticing the uncomfortable atmosphere between them. She watched how O'Connor would physically retreat whenever Reiner spoke outside of his scripted lines. He would lean back in his chair, fold his arms across his chest, and break all eye contact. These weren't random gestures. They were deliberate acts of resistance. O'Connor was freezing Reiner out in plain sight, using body language to create walls that everyone on set could see, but nobody wanted to acknowledge. Reiner refused to back down from his position. He regularly challenged scenes that he felt made Archie's bigotry seem too harmless or too funny. During script discussions, he would argue that Archie had to be exposed, corrected, and clearly defeated every single time. The audience needed to understand without any doubt that these views were wrong and harmful. O'Connor pushed back just as hard. He insisted that Archie's strength as a character came from being recognizable, from reflecting attitudes that real Americans actually held. Making him one-dimensional would kill what made the show special. The breaking point came during one particular rehearsal. Reiner questioned O'Connor's line delivery yet again, and O'Connor simply stopped everything. He didn't raise his voice or start an argument. He just looked toward Norman Lear and went completely silent. The cameras were ready, but the crew stood frozen. Nobody moved. The silence stretched on and became unbearable. Lear later admitted that moment forced him to step in and restore some kind of authority to the situation. O'Connor had drawn a boundary without speaking a single word. What O'Connor felt in these moments was deeper than artistic disagreement. He felt cornered by constant ideological pressure. While Reiner saw his arguments as standing up for moral clarity, O'Connor experienced them as personal attacks on his judgment and his craft. He didn't feel like Reiner was acting with him anymore. It felt like Reiner was acting against him, using every scene as an opportunity to prove himself right and O'Connor wrong. But the real damage was still accumulating, and it went far beyond what happened on set. The cultural battle was playing out in newspapers and television reviews across the country. The cultural war and its cost. O'Connor eventually put words to what he felt was happening. He said that Rob always thought he was smarter than everyone else. That single sentence revealed everything about how O'Connor saw the situation. To him, Reiner didn't just disagree with creative choices. He looked down on everyone who didn't share his worldview. This wasn't about respecting the craft of acting anymore. Reiner was weaponizing it, turning every scene into a lecture and every rehearsal into a moral judgment. O'Connor found that absolutely unforgivable. Then the press started weighing in, and everything got worse. Critics began writing reviews that described Mike Stivic as the voice of reason on the show. They painted Archie Bunker as the obstacle to progress, the ignorant fool who needed to be corrected by his smarter, more enlightened son-in-law. O'Connor read those reviews. He absorbed every word. To him, this wasn't just commentary about fictional characters. It felt personal. Reiner wasn't just winning their arguments on screen anymore. He was winning them in the court of public opinion. What deepened O'Connor's resentment was the sense that his character's humanity was being sacrificed for political points. He had worked hard to make Archie Bunker more than a cartoon bigot. He wanted audiences to recognize their own relatives in Archie, to see the complexity of someone shaped by their time and circumstances. But the way critics celebrated Mike and dismissed Archie made O'Connor feel like all that nuance was being erased. Years later, O'Connor would say something that left no room for misinterpretation. He stated that he had worked with many people he couldn't stand over his long career, but Rob topped them all. That wasn't a casual comment or something said in the heat of the moment. It was a final, considered judgment. Out of everyone O'Connor had encountered in decades of professional work, Reiner remained at the top of his list. Here's the cruel irony that nobody wants to admit. All in the Family became legendary television precisely because the conflict was genuine. Those father and son-in-law clashes felt dangerous and unpredictable because they actually were. The anger carried weight because it wasn't manufactured by writers or performed by actors playing roles. It was lived and felt by two men who genuinely despised each other but had to show up and work together anyway. Yet somehow, the network kept celebrating their success, while two professionals walked onto the same set every single day, carrying real hatred. But when the show finally ended, would distance heal what years of forced proximity had broken? The unhealed separation. When All in the Family officially ended in 1979, people inside CBS quietly assumed something that seemed logical. Surely the hostility between O'Connor and Reiner would dissolve once they weren't forced to work together anymore. Distance and time heal most wounds, right? Except this time, it didn't work that way. The hatred didn't fade or soften. It simply lost its audience. Without cameras rolling and a studio full of people watching, the conflict just became private instead of public. O'Connor moved directly into Archie Bunker's place, carrying his iconic character forward into a new show. The difference in his demeanor was immediately noticeable to people who worked with him. Gene Stapleton later remarked privately that O'Connor seemed lighter and more at ease without Reiner around. But whenever someone brought up Reiner's name in conversation, O'Connor's entire tone would shift. His voice would harden, the lightness would disappear. The resentment hadn't gone anywhere. It had just settled deeper inside him. By the early 80s, the two men existed in completely different Hollywood worlds. O'Connor stayed in television, eventually reinventing his public image within the heat of the night in 1988. He found new success playing a very different kind of character, proving he was more than just Archie Bunker. Meanwhile, Reiner was building a reputation as a talented director. He earned serious industry respect with This Is Spinal Tap in 1984 and Stand By Me in 1986. Their careers were both thriving, but their paths never crossed. Throughout interviews during the 80s and 90s, O'Connor consistently refused to soften the history between them. Journalists would occasionally ask about their relationship, probably hoping for some heartwarming story about how they'd made peace. O'Connor shut that down every time. He rejected the phrase creative differences completely. To him, it was sustained personal disrespect that lasted years. Reiner took the opposite approach. He remained almost completely silent about O'Connor. He didn't challenge O'Connor's version of events in public. He didn't try to defend himself or offer his own perspective. People close to Reiner said this silence was deliberate. He had genuinely moved on, both professionally and emotionally. He wasn't interested in keeping the conflict alive. They never shared a stage again. They never acknowledged each other's continued success. The conflict simply froze in place, unchanged and unresolved, waiting for nothing because nothing was coming. It just existed, permanent and immovable. But even death itself wouldn't bring closure to what had been broken decades earlier. Death ended nothing. When Carroll O'Connor died on June 21, 2001, at the age of 76, Hollywood paused to remember him. Networks immediately started replaying classic episodes of All in the Family. Critics wrote long pieces revisiting Archie Bunker's complicated legacy and his impact on American television. But one voice remained notably quiet during all of this. Rob Reiner did not step forward with any grand gesture of reconciliation. There was no attempt to rewrite the narrative or correct the public record about their relationship. He didn't offer personal reflections on their turbulent years, working together beyond acknowledging O'Connor's undeniable importance to television history. What Reiner gave was professional respect, and absolutely nothing more than that. That restraint actually mattered more than people realized. Reiner could have easily used O'Connor's death as an opportunity to soften the story, to paint their conflict as something smaller or more forgivable than it was. He could have claimed they'd made peace privately or suggested that time had healed old wounds. He didn't do any of that. Instead, he allowed O'Connor's harsh words to stand exactly as they were, final and uncontested. By staying silent, Reiner was essentially validating O'Connor's right to have felt what he felt. What makes this even more striking is the context of O'Connor's later life. He had endured profound personal tragedy, most notably the suicide of his son Hugh in 1995. That devastating loss completely reshaped O'Connor's public life. He became an advocate for suicide prevention and spoke openly about grief and mental health. People who knew him said the tragedy brought out a deeper compassion in him. He became softer in many ways, more understanding of human pain and struggle. O'Connor had said what he meant while he was alive, and he never took any of it back. Reiner moved forward with his life and career, rarely speaking about O'Connor again. But their silence toward each other would outlast them both, leaving behind questions that nobody could answer anymore. The silence that became the final word. The silence between Carroll O'Connor and Rob Reiner didn't fade after O'Connor's death. It simply hardened into something permanent, becoming part of television history itself. Their story stands as proof that some conflicts don't resolve. They don't lead to tearful reconciliations or heartfelt apologies. They just outlive the people who carried them, leaving behind unanswered questions and competing interpretations that nobody can settle anymore. This creates a fascinating puzzle that people still debate today. Was O'Connor genuinely defending artistic integrity, or did personal pride transform what started as a professional disagreement into a lifelong feud he refused to let go? There's evidence for both interpretations. O'Connor clearly had strong principles about his craft and how characters should be portrayed. He believed deeply that Archie Bunker needed complexity and humanity to work as social commentary. Those weren't shallow concerns. They reflected decades of experience and a sophisticated understanding of how audiences connect with flawed characters. But there's also no denying that O'Connor held on to his resentment with remarkable intensity. Even after achieving new success with different projects, even after experiencing personal tragedy that changed his perspective on life, he never softened his stance on Reiner. That level of sustained hostility suggests something beyond professional disagreement. At some point, it became personal in a way that O'Connor either couldn't or wouldn't move past. The same question applies to Reiner's silence. Was it dignity or avoidance? Some people see his refusal to engage as the mature choice, the decision of someone who recognized that rehashing old conflicts serves no purpose. He moved on with his life, built an impressive directing career, and didn't let the past define him. That takes real emotional intelligence and self-control. Why give energy to something that happened decades ago with someone who clearly didn't want reconciliation anyway? But others wonder if Reiner's silence was actually a form of avoidance. Maybe he never fully processed his own role in the conflict. Maybe staying quiet was easier than examining whether his younger self had actually been as self-righteous and overbearing as O'Connor claimed. By never addressing it directly, Reiner protected himself from having to acknowledge that he might have been wrong or that his approach had genuinely hurt someone he worked with for years. This feud offers something valuable that goes against everything Hollywood usually teaches us. Not every conflict needs a redemption arc. Not every broken relationship requires a feel-good ending where everyone hugs and admits they were both partly wrong. Sometimes professional excellence exists right alongside personal animosity, and that's actually okay. O'Connor and Reiner created groundbreaking television that changed American culture while genuinely hating each other. That proves something important about the separation between the work and the person. The industry's obvious discomfort with their unresolved tension reveals more about our collective need for neat narratives than it does about the reality of human relationships. We want stories where people learn lessons, grow, and make peace. We want forgiveness and understanding to triumph. But real life doesn't always cooperate with those expectations. Sometimes people just disagree fundamentally about things that matter to them, and no amount of time or success or even tragedy changes that. The ultimate truth is simple and uncomfortable. Respect for the work doesn't require respect for the person. You can despise your coworker and still show up every day to create something extraordinary together. O'Connor and Reiner proved that, and their silence became the final word on a conflict that never needed resolution to be understood. But this raises one more question that extends beyond their personal story. How many other legendary partnerships in Hollywood history were built on similar foundations of genuine hatred?